Hello and welcome. This week, we are focusing on how to shift into acceptance of the unpreferred. And I really want to emphasize it is acceptance of the unpreferred, not appreciation of the unpreferred. There is no point spinning your wheels trying to like something that you don't. And as we've discussed in weeks past, this practice isn't about looking for gratitude in the experiences that you couldn't possibly ever be grateful about. This week, we are simply practicing accepting, and most powerfully, offering no resistance. This is best summed up by the expression, it is what it is. I love the neutrality of that saying. There's no emotional reactivity. There's no intensity. It simply is what it is. And there's a level of peace in that. Shifting into acceptance of the unpreferred isn't about trying to convince yourself that you're happy when the fact is you're very much less than impressed with what's going on. Shifting into acceptance of the unpreferred is reminding yourself that you are a co-creator of your life, and that recognizing the greatest influence you have over anything is how you choose to respond, and doing so deliberately. In essence, stepping back into your power. Composer Irving Berlin said that life is 10% what you make it and 90% how you take it. These moments of the unpreferred that I'm going to refer to as contrast isn't comfortable. And I'm not suggesting that you succumb to tolerating something or resign to it. I'm also not saying deny it or ignore it. What I'm saying is that if you aren't passionate enough about that contrast to advocate for change, let it go. Choose not to be pulled into it. Choose not to become embroiled by it. Choose not to give it free rent in your headspace. That's so important that I want to repeat it again. If it is something that you aren't passionate enough to advocate for change, let it go. Contrast, at the very least, can be invaluable, especially when we respond to it from a place of neutrality and recognize it as a form of guidance. These moments of the unpreferred can be seen as metaphorical signposts. And I'm going to assume that it's probably been a while since you've seen a signpost that riles you up. This metaphorical signpost of the unpreferred, that moment of contrast, is offering you awareness very clearly as to what direction you need to go to feel better. This metaphorical signpost of this unpreferred is directing you where you want to be. And sometimes we can't truly appreciate or love where we are or what we are experiencing without clearly recognizing what it is we don't want to be experiencing. As we explore the concept of shifting into acceptance of the unpreferred, let's revisit for a moment what was learned in the understanding energy attachments. When this moment of the unpreferred occurs and you respond to it without awareness, whether that is responding from frustration or with judgment, your emotions become resistance. And when you are experiencing that resistance, you are amplifying the unpreferred just by the attention you are giving it with your resistance. Essentially, it's having a tug of war with life. Tug of wars are a lot of hard work, and they're draining. As we learned in the Practicing Presence module, when we are deeply connected with our present moment, we are better able to identify how we want to respond. And it becomes far easier to realize when we've picked up that tug of war rope and are about to get blistered hands fighting against reality. So, what gets in our way of shifting into acceptance of the unpreferred? Our expectations, our internal dialogue, over attachment, trying to exert influence, overthinking, and ineffective boundaries. I'd like to speak for a moment about expectations. They bring us so much pressure, not just to us, but to those around us. Whether these are expectations that we've placed on ourselves or others, and especially if these expectations haven't been clearly and articulately communicated. Maybe I live under a rock, but I only just heard the expression, expectations are premeditated resentments. Can we get a hallelujah, please? Expectations are premeditated resentments. Examining our expectations and adjusting them accordingly, and letting ourselves or others off the hook can be one of the most compassionate things we choose to do. We learn to be flexible, and we end up sparing a lot of unnecessary suffering. In the book Gestalt Therapy Verbatim, Fritz Perls wrote, "I do my thing and you do your thing. I am not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you are not in this world to live up to mine. You are you, and I am I. And if by chance we find each other, it's beautiful. If not, it can't be helped." This week, pay attention and explore some of the expectations you may be holding. Embrace compassion and practice letting those expectations go. Next up, internal dialogue. The other day, I'm standing in front of the kitchen sink, stacked with dirty dishes, and as I'm taking care of them, because I need to make sure there's a bowl available for tomorrow's breakfast, I catch myself as I'm scrubbing, filling my head with all sorts of untruths. I'm telling myself that I'm the only one that does dishes, and it's an act of disrespect that somebody else hasn't already dealt with it. And as I scrub, I'm finding myself feeling more and more frustrated. If I wasn't aware of what was happening in my mind, I could have very easily let that frustration grow into anger. Fortunately, I very quickly tuned into this heap of dung that my internal dialogue was trying to sell me on, and I was able to reframe it in a more positive light. My sink was in fact full of dirty dishes because my family has the privilege of eating 3 meals a day. My sink was full of dishes because our life is full of wonderful moments. My sink was full of dishes because I have a thriving business that I love and no desire to deal with the dishes during the day. My sink was full of dishes because I am fortunate enough to have a dishwasher, one that happened to be full of clean dishes that simply hadn't been unloaded yet because we'd been too busy having adventures. Reframing our inner dialogue can be tremendously helpful, helping us shift into acceptance of the unpreferred. One last tip about inner dialogue before moving on to the next acceptance roadblock. I find that one of the fastest and most effective means of shutting down negative internal dialogue is breaking out into song. And if I'm in a spot where I can't sing aloud, singing in my head is just as effective. We'll put that under random offerings. Next up, over attachment. Nothing kills going with the flow more swiftly than over attachment to an outcome. A lot of times we become over attached to an outcome because we think it's going to make us happy. When we take strides in the present moment to make ourselves happier, we are then better equipped to let the attachment go. I can often be heard around the house using the mantra, this or something better. Holding space and hope that there is a result awaiting us that is even better than we could have ever dreamed holds space for possibility. Dr. Anna Kress, a Princeton-based clinical psychologist, identifies 3 steps to overcoming overattachment. Number 1, when you discover yourself overly attached to an outcome, meet yourself with compassion. Number 2, remain open to opportunities and keep all options on the table. Number 3, ask for more. Dr. Kress explains that our mind likes to have problems to work on, and they'll happily work on whatever problems we give them. If your mind is focused on solving the problem of trying to come up with just one viable option, it's going to work under the premise that that one viable option is difficult for you. Meet yourself with compassion. And if you can, in that moment, try shifting to discover something you can be grateful for. Next up, something I know about all too well, trying to force change. Woe is the one that has ever picked up the tug-of-war rope and feels that they can exert change over reality. God grant me to accept the serenity to change the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Instead of trying to influence what you cannot change, dare to influence what you can. Something that helps me at times like these is connecting with the universal law of perpetual transmutation of energy. God, that's a mouthful. It's also known as the universal law of cycles. It decrees that everything is always in flux. Everything has its own seasons, its own cycles, and its own ebb and flow. When we embrace the wisdom that everything is always in the midst of changing, we can appreciate that if everything is guaranteed to change, then the unpreferred is also going to change in its own time. And we can give it the time and the space to do so without getting all riled up about it and extending how long it sticks around for by paying attention to it. If I am impatiently itching for change to happen, I remind myself that change is inevitable. I repeat the Serenity Prayer again and laugh at myself, albeit with compassion. Then we have to choose to put down the tug-of-war rope and, if necessary, apply ointment to our blistered palms. Next up, overthinking. For the love of Hannah and all things holy, has overthinking ever made anything better? I'm not talking about brainstorming creative solutions. I'm talking about fretting, worrying, and once again, that inner critic picking up the megaphone. Do you remember what I said earlier about singing? Not only will this stop the internal dialogue, it also releases endorphins, increases oxygen levels, and is a natural stress reliever. Let go of the notion that you can't sing. If you have a voice, you can sing. If we go back far enough, we recognize that every single one of our ancestors sang. Do not deny the wisdom of your ancestors. Finally, ineffective boundaries. This isn't just the boundaries with those around us. This, most importantly, is the boundaries that we have with ourselves. When we have strong boundaries with ourselves, we put our own needs and our wellness rituals at the top of our to-do list. When we have clear boundaries with ourselves about our values and what's truly important, we are less likely to overdo for others, less likely to self-sacrifice, less likely to overreact, less likely to leak our energy everywhere. And shifting into acceptance of the unpreferred is personal energy management at its finest. We've all heard the saying, what we resist will persist. It's true, what we focus on grows. We are amplifying it with our attention. So I ask you, what are you amplifying? Embrace the adventures of going with the flow. Dare to explore your own flexibility and resilience, and rise above by offering neutrality to the unpreferred if it's not something that you're passionate enough to advocate for change. When you practice neutrality, you soften your resistance, and it is far easier to move from neutrality into appreciation than it is to move from frustration or anger into appreciation. When you step back and take a broader view of the unpreferred, when you step back and take a broader view beyond the unpreferred, you're going to find opportunities to appreciate and to practice gratitude. Neutrality. When we are able to accept what is and make peace with the unpreferred, we open the space to be pleasantly surprised by the happily unexpected. Choosing to make peace with what has arisen releases the burden of feeling irritated and liberates us from being nattering nitpickers. When you choose to make peace with the unpreferred, you just might be surprised by the space that you create to become pleasantly surprised by the unexpected. Acknowledge what you'd like to be different. Ask for help or support. Practice healthy boundaries with yourself and with others. Don't sweat the small stuff. Meet yourself with compassion and go with the flow. Here's to savoring the messy moments and shifting into acceptance of the unpreferred and dropping your end of the tug of war rope. Thumpity thump thump, thumpity thump thump beats my grateful, grateful heart.